Hey guys, it's Miss Miller. I miss you all so much, and I hope you're watching these videos. I'm having fun making them for you. We're starting literal equations, which you'll kind of dig in deeper when you get to Algebra 1 next year, but I kind of wanted to start it so you would have a kind of an advantage next year on literal equations. So, rewriting equations and formulas. What is a literal equation? What does literal mean? All literal means is it's an equation with two or more variables. So like normally we're just solving for x. Like we just have x and we're solving for it. Now there might be an x and a y. There might be x, y, z. Any equation that has more than one letter in it, so more than one alphabet in it, that means it's a literal equation. So if we look at these that they gave us, which of these are literal equations and why? So this one, number one, says A equals 1/2 times B times H. That's area of a triangle. But how many alphabet letters do you see in that? I see an A, a B, and an H. So this one is literal because how many alphabet letters does it have in it? Three variables. So it is literal because it's got more than one alphabet. If you look at number two, all I have is an x. Well, that's only one. That's like a normal equation we're used to. So this one's not literal. It's got to have more than one. If we look at three, I've got an x and a y. There's two. That's all I need, and it's literal. So this one is because it's got two variables or two letters in it. So when I have two variables in it, or more than two variables in it, can I solve and get something like x equals 2? I can't really solve and figure out what it is without having more equations, which you'll go more into solving systems of equations in Algebra 1. But how are these different than the other equations we've been solving? Well, like we just said, we won't be able to simplify and get an answer like x equals 2. That's not what your final answer is going to look like. Here's our steps for solving literal equations, just like regular equations. You draw your line. You label your sides. One side's the variable side, and one side's everything else. And this is why we called it everything else when we were solving one-step or multi-step equations with one variable. We called it everything else instead of like the number side or something, because in literal, if we're solving for y, well, y is going to go on one side. Everything that's not a y has to go on the other side. So if I've got a y and an x in the equation, well, then only y can go on the left. The x has got to go to the right because it's not a y. And again, I'll do more examples, but it'll tell you what it wants you to solve for. So if there's more than one variable, it'll tell you, hey, solve for x, solve for y, solve for b, whatever it is. Next step is add or subtract. To move your term to the correct side. So we're just adding or subtracting to get our variable on one side, everything else that's not the variable we're solving for on the other side. And then step last, multiply or divide by the coefficient. So if we're wanting to get y by itself and I've got 3y, well, I've got to divide everything on the other side by 3, the coefficient, the number in front of the y. Okay, we ready for some examples? Let's do it. Let's do some math. Okay, so 4 says, got 3y plus 4x equals 9. Well, I've got a y and an x, so I know it's literal. There's two variables. So step number first is to draw my line. And this time it says solve for y. So my variable, what I want to solve for is I'm going to get y on one side, and again, it doesn't matter which side. Y on one side, everything else that's not a y on the other side. Well, if I look at my first term, it's 3y. It's got a y. It can stay on the y side. That's perfectly fine. So he's staying. 4x, though, he can't stay. He's not a y. We've got to move him over. And you've got to take this coefficient with them. There's 4 of them. We got to move them over. Instead of adding 4x, we do the inverse, the opposite. I'm going to subtract 4x. And whatever I do to one side, I've got to do the other. Now, here's the key. I can't subtract 4x from 9. They don't have the same last name. His last name's X, and he doesn't have a last name. There's no way to subtract those two. That's not happening. So instead of subtracting 9 minus 4x, I have to keep them separated. They have to be separate. So over here, this goes away, and I'm left with the 3y equals. Well, on this side, it doesn't matter which order. You could do 9 minus 4x, or you could do negative 4x plus 9. Either way works. As long as you do not combine them. You can't add 9 plus negative 4. That's not going to happen. They don't have the same last name. So now I've got all the y's on one side and everything that's not a y on the other. But I just want y, and right now I've got 3 y's. Well, to get rid of that 3, I divide by the coefficient or the number in front. So I'm going to take it and divide by 3. Well, whatever I do on one side, I got to do the other. And here's the trick. Over here, I've got to divide everything by 3. So normally we only have one term on the left, one term on the right. Now we can have a lot of terms on one side and one term on the other. So now I've got to divide everything by 3. Everything gets divided by 3. Well, if I have a 3 on top and a 3 on bottom, those go away. And I'm left with y equals negative 4 over 3. Leave it. Leave it a fraction. It's our slope, so leave it a fraction. And 9 divided by 3. Well, 3 times 3 is 9, so 3 goes into 9 3 times. That is my literal equation after I solved for y. I got y on one side, everything that's not y on the other. So it's not bad. If you are great at solving equations, it's not going to be bad. If you're still struggling with solving equations, keep practicing. Do some of those practice problems I sent out last week. Keep practicing multi-step, one-step equations with one variable. Keep doing it. Okay, let's look at number next. Let's look at 5. Okay, so we've got 20x plus 5y equals 15. Solve for y. I've got 2 variables, 2 alphabets, an x and a y, so I know it's literal. I draw my line. Solve for y. I want y on one side. Everything else that's not y comes over here. Well, 20x, he can't be on the y side. His last name's X, not Y. So if it's positive 20x, to get rid of it, I would subtract 20x. Whatever I do on one side, I got to do the other. Well, 20x minus 20x goes away. I'm left with plus 5y, or just 5y. I can't combine them again. They can't be combined. And again, you can write 15 minus 20x, or you can write negative 20x plus 15. Either way works. I normally try to write the x first, just to get it in slope-intercept form. It does not matter, though. Either way works. Well, now I've got all y's on one side and everything else that's not a y on the other. However, I only want one y, and I've got 5. So I'm going to divide by this coefficient, or the number in front of the y. And remember, that's got to go to everything. Everything. So it's got to go to this negative 20x and the positive 15. Well, if I have 5 on top and bottom, he's gone. I'm left with y equals negative 20 divided by 5 is negative 4. His last name stays the same. He's still got a last name of X. Plus 15 divided by 5 is 3. So y equals negative 4x plus 3. That's solving for y. If they said solve for x, we could definitely solve for x too. Let's look at number 6. So I've got 6x minus 3y equals negative 6. Well, again, I've got two variables, x and y. I draw my line. I'm solving for y, so I'm going to put y on this side, everything else on the other side. And again, it doesn't matter if you put y on the other side, that's fine. The only reason I'm keep putting y on the left is because y is already on the left. I don't want to have to move them over here. Make your y side wherever y is already at to save you a step. But if you like having y on the right, move y on the right. It's not going to make any difference. So again, everything that's not y has got to move. Well, this 6x is not y. He's got to move. So positive 6x, I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides. 6x minus 6x goes away. I'm left with negative 3y equals, I can't combine these two. They don't have the same last name. So I have negative 6x minus 6, or negative 6 minus 6x. Either way. Step number last, I divide by my coefficient because I only want one y. Right now I've got negative 3. So I divide by negative 3. And again, everything's got to get divided by negative 3. Negative 3 on top and bottom goes away. I'm left with y equals negative 6 divided by negative 3. And again, use your calculators. 2, and he has the last name of x. Don't forget his last name. Negative 6 divided by negative 3 is positive 2 again. And he doesn't have a last name. So he's just positive 2. And there we have it. Okay, number last. A little bit trickier. I've got y equals 3x plus 5z. I've got three variables, three alphabets, x, y, z. It already has solved for y, but they told me to solve for x. Who knew it couldn't be that easy? So again, I'm going to make x one side, everything else the other. I'm going to put x on the right because x is already here on the right. It's going to save me a step. If you want to put x on the left, that's fine. It's just going to be one more step, but we're all getting to Walmart. Next, everything else that's not x has to come over here. So 3x, he gets to stay on the x side, but 5z can't. He's got to move over to the everything else side. So positive 5z, I've got to subtract 5z from both sides. Those go away. I'm left with 3x on this side. A y minus 5z, they can't combine. So it's just y minus 5z. Or negative 5z plus y. Either way. Step last, I divide by the coefficient, which is 3 in this case. Everything gets divided by 3. Leave it as a fraction. Don't change all this into a decimal. 3 on top and bottom goes away. I'm left with x equals, well, there's this imaginary 1. There's one y there. So 1 over 3, just leave it. 1 over 3, his last name's y, minus 5 over 3, z. Last name z. Leave it like that. Don't even change it to a decimal. It's way easier this way. And if you don't like seeing it this way, which I kind of think it's prettier to have x on the other side and have x equals whatever, you can just rewrite it. You can flip it. X equals 1/3 y minus 5, 3, z. Either one of those. Well, that's solving literal. I'm going to add a few more videos to this, but that's all there is to it. If you're great at solving equations, again, you're going to be great at this. Don't get overwhelmed. All you're doing is whatever it tells you to solve for goes on one side. Everything else that's not that goes together, and it's the same steps as solving equations like I've been doing all year long. Keep up the good work. I'm super proud of y'all. Please, if you have questions, ask me. And I can do Zoom videos with people who have questions. I can work one-on-one with people who have questions. So please reach out. I love teaching. That's what I do, why I do what I do. And so this has been really difficult. So if you just want to talk or you need help on math, let me know. I miss you guys. Y'all have a great week. Bye, y'all.